Welcome to the PVN College Podcast, where our goal is to grow students in the love and knowledge of Jesus Christ. In today's episode, we're going to talk about ministering to the next generation. What does Gen Z need from church leaders? Our guest today is Kent Howard. Kent is a director for the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. He grew up on the mean streets of Maplewood in North Rome, where he attended Rome High School and Shorter University. After college, he spent 2 years in finance and 13 years as a teacher and athletic coach. He is currently a special education teacher at Calhoun High School. He is married to his high school sweetheart, Lauren, and they have two beautiful children. Dr. Howard, welcome to the podcast, man.
Thank you. Thank you, Pastor.
The mean streets of Maplewood.
Oh,
huh?
Man. North Rome, hardcore living, man.
all the pleated khakis and just so dangerous.
Oh, loafers everywhere, dude. Rough.
Yeah, you got to like how I put that Dr. Howard in there.
I like that, man. You know,
it's a sign of respect. It really is.
I appreciate it. But you know what? That kind of stuff makes me uncomfortable, bro. I'll be honest with you. Like pastor, doctor, anything with title. Nah, I like to just be Kent or coach, whatever. But I appreciate the respect, bro.
I spoke at Shorter. I did their chapel last year, and the guy introduced me as Reverend Ryan Mathis.
That's on.
I literally said
level.
I want to be addressed as Reverend everywhere I go now. Everywhere I go,
dude,
it must be.
That's legit. Now that's another level of pastor.
I feel like it.
I feel like I sit up straighter or
Chief
something.
pastor, high priest is next. So today we're talking about ministering to the next generation. This is obviously a broad topic because middle school, high school, and college level, they're all under this banner of Gen Z, right? For better or worse. How you minister to a 12-year-old who's Gen Z, how you minister to a 19-year-old who's Gen Z, what does that look like? I mean, just before we get into the actual Q&A of it all, any kind of opening thoughts on the fact that this is a broad group? How do you meet those needs?
Yeah, no. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on, man. It's been awesome. Listen, I'm an old guy now, right? I'm 43.
Whatever.
So
really,
you young guys coming up are just so. I mean, it's just cool to hang around young guys with the passion that you guys have, and I feel like kind of the old guy because I've taught millennials and now with Gen Z kids, whether it be ministry or in school. So, I'll just tee it up like this. How things were done 5 years ago in ministry, especially with students, it's a totally different ballgame.
Yes.
Just even 5 years. And so when you think generationally, you think, 20, 30, 40 years.
Right.
But we've just turned the corner into a new generation. So the way things were done just a few years ago are not the same way they need to be done now.
Yeah.
Relationships wise, it is. I mean, being relational is key, right? And building relationships. But the goal is discipleship.
Right.
How do we do that? Well, we know relationships is a part of that. So all that to say, the first thing that pops in my head is, do the people who minister to students or teach students, do they even know who they are as a generation or as a people? Right.
And like to your point, it's not that millennials were 15, 25 years ago and now things have changed. We are on the tip of this new change. This is just 3 to 5 years in the making. So I think everybody, is it fair to say, I think everyone, myself included, is kind of just now trying to figure this whole thing out.
Oh,
you
absolutely.
Know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just now trying to get their heads around, okay, here's this new generation. What in the world? How do we do this?
I mean, and I don't know what the grace period looks like.
Yeah.
What do we give people? The part of me wants to walk into churches or into a pair of churches that are struggling, and they ask the question like, how do I get to these kids? What do we do? What do we do? And I don't know how long we should give them to ask that question before we finally just. Have to go coach mode, like hardcore Nick Saban on them. Like, dude, pick up some literature where the experts have done all that for you.
Yeah, right.
And feed yourself full of knowledge. Let's go. The days of, these kids, they just don't want to this, and it's not the same as when I grew up. And
right.
Well, no duh.
Yeah.
It's a totally different game.
I know.
And if we're not leading them well, it's on us.
Yeah.
Right? It's the first post-Christian generation in the history of the world.
No, go ahead.
And I mean, and so I say all that to say it's a whole different perspective when you're planning and you're learning how to engage and empower and equip them. And so there's some pros and cons to that, right?
Yeah.
For them being a post-Christian generation, man. I mean, there's a lot that you have to consider.
Yes. Well, and to your point, I think a huge key to this. So as a millennial, this is my first time that I'm not the cool one anymore. It's Gen Z's turn. Right. They're the new, the cutting edge, the different. And now I'm everyone used to, your generation looked at my generation and said, oh, these kids, I don't know. Now I'm the one looking down saying, oh, these kids, man, I don't, when I was a kid, it's, and so I think, especially with millennials looking at Gen Z, there's got to be a humility because we've never had to adjust. For my whole life, everyone has had to adjust to me. Everyone's trying to figure out what the millennials are thinking. Right. Well, now it's not us anymore. Now we have to. This is the first time millennials are going to have to adjust for the next generation. So I think there's a humility. What role does humility play in getting out the literature and all that? What do you think?
Yeah, dude. You just made a great point. Yeah. I feel for you because millennials don't relate to Gen Zs like Gen X guys, me.
Okay.
Skipping a generation is proven that when you skip a generation, you're more like every other generation.
Okay.
So as a Gen X guy, I relate well to the Gen Z. They're very similar of sorts. And I could go into all the literature on that.
Yeah, right.
But at the end of the day, it's actually tougher for a guy like you to engage that generation because it is radically different.
Yeah,
but over time, it's proven that things kind of cycle back. So, for example, Gen Z, they are 72% of all Gen Z students say that they want to start their own business. Okay. Financially speaking, they're very future driven. They are very tight-fisted with their money. They're very self-directed and self-motivated.
Yeah.
So millennials are still living in their parents' basements, right? The Gen Z kid is ready to go fly.
Yeah, right.
They have no interest in being at home with their parents. They're thinking about the future. All this other stuff is petty to them. They're saving their money. Millennials have already spent all their money.
Amen.
I mean, it's just totally radical, different wise. And so, so it's neat. And I try to encourage pastors, church leaders. Hey, listen, you get to know these guys. They're a ton of fun, man. And it's neat to engage a group who is very different than we are.
Right.
I mean, that's what happens when you encounter lost people, man. When you engage lost people, they're coming from a different framework and a different mindset, in a different stratosphere in the way that they base their values.
Yeah.
And so there's really no different. I love the differences in the generations and figuring out who they are and what appeals to them.
Yeah.
And so, just throwing this out. Like, if you know that 72% of students in high school are entrepreneurial at heart, I've heard pastors preach on the way that churches are growing throughout the world, and it starts with business. It doesn't start with evangelism. It starts with economic prosperity.
Okay.
An opportunity of sorts. Just radically speaking, what guy wants to get in and teach a Gen Z kid how to grow money or a business or an idea or create before they go in and hammer with the gospel?
Right.
But if you look at third world countries or countries that are experiencing tremendous growth, it's a lot of times started with an opportunity where you go in and your time is invested in the things that really engage them first.
Yeah, humbly learning the culture.
Yeah, so that's humility, right?
Yeah.
You talking about humility is going in, and although you're just burning up with the desire to share the gospel through your actions, through your willingness to help and to to be hospitable even.
Yeah.
I mean, it's proven that hospitality, man, is leading more people to Christ than evangelism.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
Right.
study-wise. So I say all that to say that's part of, humility. And so you brought that up. I think it's a great word. That's actually my word for the year is humility.
There we go.
And in the book of James, chapter 4, verse 10. So at the end of the day, all that to say, man, I think, just getting to know these jokers is really, really a neat thing. And so if there's a pastor watching or a leader, a small group leader, one of the things that I think is really neat, about Gen Z, if I could just drop the mic.
Please. Well, it's connected to the thing.
So I won't drop it. And it costs a lot of money. But I mean, I think the thing is like the Gen Z kid more than any generation in our lifetime.
Yeah.
You're a millennial, I'm a Gen X guy, but the Gen Z is proven to be more realist than any other generation.
Okay.
So they want to know your story. They don't want your facts. They want authenticity. They want your story.
Yeah.
And I wrote that here in my notes that, and Craig Groeschel says this, the great leader, be real over being right.
Okay.
Just be real.
Yeah.
These kids respond to authenticity, transparency, and your story.
Yeah.
And that's why sharing your testimony now may be more key than ever, right? Is being willing to stand up and say, hey, I've struggled with this or this. And it not be what we've seen in testimony where somebody is, woe is me.
Yeah.
Hey, here is my story. This is it.
Right.
And this is what God has done to restore me.
Yeah.
This group is actually more willing to listen than any group in history for a couple of reasons. Number one, they're realist, right? Number two, it's a post-Christian generation.
Yeah.
So roll with me here. Jump in anytime now. But it's a post-Christian generation, so they are literally open to anything.
Yeah.
Now, that's scary.
Right. Sure.
But it's also super cool.
Yeah.
Because they have no imprint from the local church at this point. As a post-Christian generation, you're talking about 4% of Gen Z kids have a biblical view of life, right? So it's actually the greatest time in the history of the world to share the gospel, to share your story.
Yeah.
They're listening.
Interesting.
But they're also listening to everything else out there.
Yeah.
And so that's the flip side. And so a part of me, I'm like you, man. I'm hungry to see lost people know Christ and have a personal relationship with Him. But the whole time people are spending, complaining about them, they could be spending getting to know them and engaging them.
Well, I think to your point, as you're speaking to, Kent, first of all, that was so helpful. But for me, there's, one of the things I wrote down, I'm asking, every generation is different, but at the same time, I believe there are timeless approaches that connect to every generation that because the Bible is timeless, right? And two, that you seem to write down relationships, which was huge in my generation as well. Just building relationships with people, I think, will always be the number one way to draw people in. And this humility, this willingness to pick up a book and learn what Gen Z thinks from the experts, or to just get to know the culture of Gen Zers around you. And I'm reminded of, in Ecclesiastes, it says there's nothing new under the sun. Gen Z is new to us, but Gen Z is not new in terms of God's view of generations past. Not that there has been a Gen Z before, but there's always a new, 15 years from now, we're going to be having the exact same conversation. What do we do about this generation? Well, instead of consistently trying to flex with every generation, can we look to some of these more timeless things? And to your point as well, so first of all, I think there are timeless things that pastors and small group leaders can trust, regardless of the generation. Now, how you connect them may be different, right? Yeah. But the other thing, too, in terms of when you said that this generation is open to, they don't have this Christian culture in them that kind of numbs you to the gospel because you grew up with it, right? It's mom and dad's. They don't have that. And it reminds me of when the woman at the well, at the end of that story, Jesus tells the disciples, look, these fields are ripe with harvest. He's not in Jerusalem. He's not in the promised land. This is Samaria. This is Gentile territory. How can that be? But that's the thing. They don't have this imprint already. They didn't grow up in it. And growing up in it is a blessing in its own way, but to a dead heart, it's a curse,
Yeah.
And these Gentiles in Samaria don't have that. Well, this Gen Z, they're growing up without the church. They're growing up without the church. But to your great point, maybe that means they're going to be open to things that, Johnny Straightlace is not open to because he's got all A's, he's doing fine. He grew up with it. Does that make sense? Am I saying that the right way?
Listen, man, you're framing it up. I mean, it's perfect. I mean, there's opportunity in what we know to be true through Jesus Christ and sharing the gospel, those timeless things that you never, because it's biblical.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
right.
Dude,
It's good.
Stay true to the Word of God, man.
Yeah.
That never changes. Understanding those kids and the way you deliver is what I was telling a group of men. I was invited in to speak to a men's group here recently, a pretty large group, and I said, listen, we will never. It's a biblical command to teach Jesus, right? We're going to teach the Word, man. However, your delivery could be tweaked. For example, I've got a 30-minute sermon that I really need, or a 40-minute sermon I really need to get across to these kids, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's packed full of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's so rich, man. I mean, let's say Romans. You're going to try to teach them passages in Romans in 30, 40 minutes, right?
Right.
And you assume because you're a great presenter that, man, they want to listen. They do. However, these kids are now learning on devices. They multitask with 5 screens at a time. Their attention span is like 3.5 seconds long, okay? To engage them in that, break it into smaller chunks.
Yeah, right.
Do 4 10 minutes, 2 15, or even 2 20, because it's not their fault.
Yeah, right.
It's the culture in which we live with technology and those kind of things. Engage them with visual. This has proven to be a visual-driven generation, man.
Yeah.
Images, any kind of imagery, any kind of visual, man, you're going to get them. You put it up on the screen. You don't even have to put notes up there, man. Like you can.
Yeah,
I
right.
like notes. I'm old school.
Yeah.
You could throw pictures the whole time you're pastor, and dude, they're locked.
Yeah, right.
It's the world they live in.
Interesting.
So just creating, because that's who they are. They're creators. The Gen Z culture is a creation culture. So by you creating with them, keeping things fresh, keeping it new, taking some risk, there's some instantaneous buy-in because you're being willing to get outside of your comfort zone and create. And they love that stuff.
Yeah.
And that's what millennials can actually do that really well if they just slow down enough to do it. But yeah, man, I mean, just every guy's so different, every girl's so different in ministry, but it's be who you are as a pastor and your call in your life. And this is what I would tell anybody, but also know who you're called to lead, and know them well, and get creative, and don't assume what worked for you will work for them.
Yeah,
you're right. But again, I mean, you hit on a lot of different cylinders there with the relationships, the timeless stuff. I mean, it's all true.
Yeah.
I just like to kind of light the fire under the fanny a little bit, in people, and just get them thinking, outside the box, and be willing to man. I mean, just take a risk for Jesus from time to time with their teaching.
And I think that's the key, be willing. I think ultimately, and you're a teacher, you know this too, ultimately connecting with students, before it's a mental game, especially with evangelism, it's a heart posture. You've got to be willing to, and I think it comes down to being relational. In humility, I'm going to change the way I teach because I care about you enough, because I want to impact you. I care about you enough to impact you. So that care leads to humility, leads to me changing the way I teach. You know what I mean? The way I do things. This has been awesome, Kent. I guess before we go, so let's do one and one. One way to engage college students, maybe, that would be good, and then one way to engage middle and high school students.
Man, I wish I could give you a short answer on that. Obviously,
that needs to go on
way to engage them. I mean, obviously, I guess the cookie cutter answer, which would be the no duh type deal, would be, social media and how you present ministry to them via social.
Okay.
If it's about you and your church, and your program and what kids want to know, you're for them. This generation in particular, you probably read a lot on this kind of subject, but like with your social media game, it needs to be all about, the people that you're for, not your church.
Yeah, right.
And so I say that's just one example, and engaging them is tagging the mess out of them and keeping it about them and how proud you are for them, how much you are for them, just reminding them of their value.
Yeah.
And then also, being willing to, within one or two meetings, share your story.
Yeah.
A lot of guys, and I say this, and girls, we've had this life before Christ and now after, and we think or assume people don't want to hear that right off the bat.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to work in, and one day we're going to tell them our story. Here's what I would suggest with Gen Zs. I think earlier may be better than later.
That's good.
As a realist, I think sitting down with a kid and say, look, man, I've enjoyed getting to know you. You're a rock star, man. And but listen, before we even start talking deeper, I just want to tell you part of my story.
Yeah,
I mean, we're at the point, this generation they are a sponge with it when it comes to stories and authenticity and transparency over facts. So I think that's a good way to engage them, is to literally hook them, not by any way other than that's who they are. That's what they want to hear. They want to hear your story and what God's done in your life. So whether they know Christ or not, they want to hear your story.
Right.
It's who they are. And so you talked about, basically you mentioned, and a mentor said this to me one time. He said, when I was saying, I don't know how I'm going to do this thing, the FCA thing with Gen Z kids, I'm 2 generations away. I'm an old guy. And he said, you got it made. It's going to be the greatest job you've ever had, because it's easier to have new life than to try to resurrect the dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what we're dealing with, dude.
Right.
4% have an imprint from the church. New life, man. It's exciting times to be in ministry. So
for sure.
I don't know if that helps, but just a couple things that pop in.
Ken, this has been awesome, man. This has been awesome. Last thing. So, give us a tweet size deal, but so you obviously work with, represent FCA. If there are college students, we have a lot of college listeners who maybe want to get either, I don't know, can they learn about FCA, or are they at the age where they need to be helping with FCA? What does that look like for college students?
Yeah, man. Listen, volunteer opportunities are, we have a lot of those. So, if they just reach out to me, that'd be great.
Okay. Where can they find
go to you, and you can go, you send them to me. I'll make you the middleman.
Perfect.
But yeah, I would just say, listen, if it's not FCA, another parachurch organization that's out there, in the trenches. But even here, there's just so many opportunities to be missional and to get out there and to meet these kids where they are.
For sure.
It's a blessing to be a part of FCA, but it'll never be about FCA. It's just a great ministry, great organization. But our heart is to lead every coach and athlete into a growing relationship with Christ and His church. And so our job is to help support and strengthen you guys as the local church. So by you giving us folks to plug in, we feel like that helps to strengthen you, and that's our heart. But yeah, man, anybody interested, see Ryan, he'll send you to me, and we'll get you plugged in on the campus with a team or with a huddle at the school who meets virtual, whatever. We've got a ton of it going.
Cool. I love it. Kent, thanks for being with us today, man.
Thanks, man. Appreciate you having me.
For more information on this topic, message us on Instagram at PVN College. Listen to the PVN College podcast through Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. Watch this podcast on Instagram TV at PVN College or on our YouTube page, Pleasant Valley North. We love you guys, and we'll see you next time.